afternoon, everyone. My name is Everin Essen, and I'm ECI's Vice President of Research and Analytics. Welcome to today's webinar, Case Studies from Albemarle's Do-It-Yourself Approach to Analytics. This is the third and final segment of our three-part series, Data Analytics Demystified, generously sponsored by Compliance Systems Legal Group. Before we start, let's take a few minutes to watch a video about our platform today.
Welcome. Just a few notes about the On24 platform tools for today's webinar. Please use the chat tile to chat with your fellow participants and ECI staff. Use the Q&A tile to submit your questions to the presenters anytime during the presentation. If you don't see these two tiles open, please use the control console to open these and the other tools. For On24 technical support, please click on the help icon. Before leaving today's event, be sure to download your certificate of attendance for your continuing education credit, as well as any resources from our presenters. Lastly, we ask that you complete the event survey.
All right, thank you for watching that video. One other thing to keep in mind, if you happen to lose sound or you can't see the video at any point during today's presentation, click the refresh button. That tends to resolve most issues. And now I'm pleased to welcome Scott Avelino, Principal with Compliance Systems Legal Group and ACI's Ethics Officer. Scott, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Everin, and thank you, everyone, really, for joining us for this final session of our series on Data Analytics Demystified. I just wanted to, as an intro, just to do a recap of where we've been. I'm not sure if you've been to all of the sessions so far, and they all are each standalone but interconnected theme-wise, but let me just kind of recap where we are and as a context for today's content. So we began a few weeks ago with part one, and we heard then from Matt Galvin of AB InBev. And if you attended that session, then you'll recall that AB InBev has spent years and years and millions of dollars building its own proprietary compliance data analytics platform. And they've recognized that, hey, we're in the beer business, we're not in the analytics business. We've built this great tool, but now we need to unleash it into the world and perhaps even make it even more powerful. And for that, they are spinning it off into a nonprofit consortium where other partner organizations can join that and also use their platform. And it's really an idea of making the algorithms, the machine learning better, because the more companies and the more data are running through it, the sharper the analytics get. And the ultimate goal is to join hands with other companies in order to help solve the problem of gray market corruption in the world. And that's what BrewRight, AB InBev's analytics platform is intended to do, and we heard about that in platform. So that's one company's journey. The following week, we then shifted gears a little bit. This is for someone that might say, whoa, we're not ready to jump into the deep end. We don't even have a platform yet. We don't even have anyone on staff that really knows how to think about data analytics, and we don't really have the tools in-house to do that. How do we start? How can we think about this issue? So to answer that question, we brought in Parth Chanda, founder and CEO of LexTegrity. He came from Pfizer and Avon and other in-house roles where he experienced the problems that compliance practitioners face every day, and he built a software platform to try to solve for some of those internal pain points, and really to say that, you know, we've got a turnkey solution for those companies that don't want to do this on their own. They want to go to a software provider that's already built out a tool for you that you can use. And we heard from him and got some demonstrations on what LexTegrity's offering is. Today, this is really, I think it's kind of a capstone session, tying everything together. And I'm really excited because we're hearing from Andrew McBride from Albemarle Corporation, who I'll introduce you to in just a minute. But what I like about today's session is that I think Andrew's perspective is probably one that many of you can most relate to. He's a sitting in-house chief compliance officer, probably in organizations not unlike yourselves, and he's just sort of leaned into this topic in a way that is very novel, and is going to be sharing his story and his company's journey in his session. So I'm really excited about today's session. We're going to kick it off as we have in the prior ones, just to get a sense of who's in the room and where your perspectives and experience are with respect to data analytics. And so you should see on your screen now a polling question. And what I would invite you to do is just sort of self-select where you think you are in the journey. There are no right or wrong answers, from, hey, we're just very basic here, to, we're full throttle, totally advanced. That'll get a sense of where people are in their journey. And as you do that, let me just take a few words to introduce Andrew. I will say that I have had the pleasure of working with Andrew in the past. He is that, that magical mix of someone who is very smart, very hardworking, and very gracious. And just been a terrific person for me to get to know. And so I'm really honored that he has agreed to participate in today's event. And I'm excited for you to be able to hear his story. Andrew is the Chief Compliance Officer of Albemarle Corporation, which is, among other things, the world's largest producer of lithium. He spent his career largely in the natural resources space. He was Senior Counsel and Antitrust Counsel at BP. He later went on to join BHP, where he was their Acting Chief Compliance Officer. And as I said, now he is with Albemarle and is their Chief Compliance Officer. So let's see where we are on the polling results in terms of where people are in their data analytics journey. And it looks like we've got a lot of people in today's session that are more in the early stages. So just a little over half saying, hey, we're just doing some basic stuff, really focused on analytics and on some of our program processes. And a few people that are have some areas in like fraud and corruption. So that gives a sense of who's in the room, and so that's really helpful. And with that, Andrew, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Scott, for your kind words, and good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. Very much looking forward to this session. So as you can tell from my thick Southern accent, I hail from Charlotte, North Carolina. But actually, I originally hail from the United Kingdom, where I started out my compliance career as an antitrust lawyer just over 20 years ago. And I've always been interested in analytics, and that was reinforced a couple of weeks ago when I went back to the United Kingdom, and I was catching up with some of my mates from my old law firm. And they reminded me of the fact that I was known in those days as Andy Spreadsheet McBride, and with much laughter. That carried on, I think, that interest in analytics, but it wasn't really until I joined Albemarle and was getting that real insight into what could be done with the latest analytics tools. There were really kind of two key events that happened that just opened a whole new world for me. So the first was being introduced to the Tableau analytics platform, the dashboarding tool. One of my outside forensic accountants showed me an application using monitoring travel and expenses, and just understanding how you could have a whole mass of data behind this kind of dashboard visualization really kind of was a key moment for me. It was like going from spreadsheet to really something way beyond spreadsheets. The second thing was being introduced to Matt Galvin, who Scott mentioned, who gave the first presentation. Sat in a session in New York a couple of years ago. Matt really helped me understand the potential for these types of dashboards in the world of ethics and compliance. And so I very much see myself as being, if Matt is the Jedi Master, I'm kind of like one of his young Padawan disciples, really learning from him about how we use analytics in the ethics and compliance arena. But this is very much kind of our personal journey, my personal journey on analytics, of how we built our analytics program within Albemarle. Our budget for this was pretty modest, and so I have one analyst on my team who is responsible for analytics. I've been very lucky in that I've had the support of our IT team organization as well, and the support of some outside vendors just to help with setup. And I'll talk a little bit about that journey as we go through this. But I don't profess to be an expert in this space. Really, all I'm kind of going to be talking about today is how we could have built up the analytics kind of framework, and then how we're now using analytics in particular case studies or situations where it helps to identify and manage ethics and compliance risk. So what are we going to talk about today? Firstly, what is it do we mean by compliance analytics? There is actually some discretion about what you can focus on. Why build or enhance a compliance analytics program? I know that Matt and Parth will have touched on this, as well as Scott, and so I'm not going to plan to spend too much time there, but there are some important principles about how it's not just about, for example, anti-corruption compliance. There are other regulator expectations that are important to take into account when it comes to analytics. How do you get started? What are the key things that you need to be thinking about in terms of the setup, your engagement with the IT function, the use of vendors? Are you going to insource or outsource? Managing risk associated with analytics, such as data privacy. We'll touch on some of those. And then I've got a number of case studies, and that's really what I want to spend the most of my time today, is showing some very specific case studies of how we have used analytics to help manage both our risk with employee expenses, with payments to third-party sales representatives, such as agents or distributors. And then for me, perhaps one of the most interesting is how can we bring in multiple data points that serve as proxies for cultural health. Finally, I'll wrap it up with kind of saluting the fact that there is artificial intelligence and machine learning there, how that can support your ethics and compliance program, before leaving you with some key takeaways. I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions. Scott tells me he's going to be monitoring those, and we'll jump in as appropriate, and certainly we'll make sure that there is some time at the back end for questions. Okay, so what do we mean by compliance analytics? I've thrown out some kind of the terms that are bandied about in the world of analytics, and I think the sense from compliance officers sometimes it all feels a little bit overwhelming. And I think one of the key messages, and certainly the things that I've learned from when I started out 2 to 3 years ago in this journey, is that compliance analytics are really there to serve you. Like, you are the master of those. It really is driven by what you want to achieve. What outcomes do you want to be achieving in the support of your ethics and compliance program? And that there are people that can help out with you in realizing your goals. And we'll talk about those types of roles that are needed to help you support that compliance analytics program. The other thing to bear in mind, in a way, compliance analytics is a bit of a misnomer, because it's not purely about analytics to manage risk. There are many ways in which you can use analytics to support your ethics and compliance program. But let me give you one example. So 2 years ago, we were launching a new interactive e-code at Albemarle. And we had this window of time where we wanted to launch. It was just after the summer in August. And we wanted to maximize the amount of time between launch and the launch of our Code of Conduct annual training, which is typically in October of each year. And so we wanted to find out when was the time when employees were actually in the office and working. And so a simple analytics exercise was conducted in conjunction with our HR team to find out when the least amount of employees were on vacation. A really simple piece of analytics that confirmed to us, in fact, that it was August the 22nd of 2019 was the optimal time for us to launch. That's not compliance analytics, but it's information that helped maximize the effectiveness of the launch of our Code of Conduct. In the same way, we can monitor our Code of Conduct in terms of how it's used at an aggregate level. And I know, for example, through the use of the code and the use of our intranet site, the Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time is the best time to be pushing out ethics and compliance communications. Again, not compliance analytics, but information that's there to support the execution of our compliance program. So when I think about compliance analytics, you can kind of divide it or look at it through two different lenses. One is the outcome and one is the focus. So in terms of the outcome, it could be, there are many different outcomes of analytics. So one could be controls reporting, the best example of that being your training completion statistics or the compliance rates with certain pre-approval requirements. But there are other outcomes as well. Passive risk event monitoring. This is where, with similarly, the work that's done by Parth and his team, where they'll run analytics on a particular vendor set, information data set, for example, and they will throw up flags for the compliance team to then follow up. But the flag itself doesn't, in and of itself, doesn't do anything. Whereas there are other types of analytics flags which can introduce hard stops into systems themselves. A good example of that, which many of you will have, is sanctions monitoring, where, for example, within an SAP or another ERP system, the sanctions flag goes up, things get shut down until that sanctions flag is cleared. But there are other examples, and I'll give one or two examples of that coming in the coming slides. Also, risk profile monitoring. So as well as kind of snapshot moment in time assessments, that information can be aggregated over time to show how particular risks are trending, which can be information that's very useful for senior management. And we'll have an example of that in the context of sales representatives coming up. The other lens through which you look at compliance analytics, or at least I do, is the focus. And so for sure, a lot of the analytics that are done by compliance service providers, vendors, focus on transaction analytics, whether it be travel and expenses or vendors. But internally, there's also other case studies or scenarios where you may want to run analytics, where you just wanted to keep an eye on how your management of your third parties, for example, are doing. We've got an example of dashboard there. A way to assess the cultural health of the organization, bringing in data from different sources to try and kind of show how a particular business unit or a particular site are faring from a cultural health perspective. And then finally, compliance team performance. Are there any particular bottlenecks in the way in which, for example, investigations are being conducted or in the way that due diligence is being administered? Again, this information all kind of supports the ethics and compliance program. So, as I mentioned, I think that this has been touched on in some detail in previous sessions. All of you, I'm sure, are aware of the Department of Justice memo on the evaluation of corporate compliance programs and their emphasis on the use of analytics to support monitoring and risk assessment. What I want to kind of bring to attention here is it's not just that particular guidance that is relevant when thinking about the drivers for analytics programs. OFAC also issued guidance where they also touch on the relevance of software and systems, and also the Department of Justice Antitrust Division did the same, where they're talking about how the use of analytics to track engagement with competitors. One of the examples I'll kind of talk about a little later is about how we're using analytics to track pricing. That pricing kind of analytics can be used not only for antitrust purposes, but also for corruption compliance program purposes as well. And so those drivers from a regulatory expectations are not just limited to kind of corruption or general ethics compliance, but also other areas such as antitrust and trade compliance. So that analytics kind of technology can support every part of your program. Clearly, a lot of focus is spent on the monitoring aspect, but as I've already mentioned, in the context of your policies, your code of conduct, or your supporting policies, it can be used to track how employees are using those governance documents. The execution and monitoring of training, and the way in which people are engaging with communications. Analytics can be used to support investigations. That's actually outside the scope of my presentation today, but for sure, a lot of the analytics tools that we have are used as part of our investigation techniques. It's also, we collaborate with our internal audit function. We make our analytics tools available to them. That actually helps to avoid duplicative effort. And then ultimately, some other benefits relate to risk assessment. One of the, I think one of the most key statements from the Department of Justice was how we need to move away from that concept of a snapshot risk assessment to almost a real-time continuous monitoring type environment. And I think that the power of analytics and monitoring can be demonstrated by this graphic that you can see on the screen here. So many of you will perhaps do those periodic risk assessments where you'll go to a particular location, perhaps virtual at the moment, and you're asking a series of questions and you're trying to get an understanding of what's going on in any particular risk area. And then that may also be supplemented by an audit where there's a deeper dive where you're getting into books and records. The power of monitoring and supported by analytics is that it helps to fill the gaps between those key milestone events and actually reinforces and improves the quality of those milestone events. If I give you an example, we have a program to manage our third-party sales representatives. So as you would expect, every so often, we will conduct due diligence on our distributors. And then for our high-risk distributors, we also conduct third-party audits on them. Through our monitoring that we do in between, whether that's reputational monitoring, pricing or payments monitoring, that information helps to maintain their dialogue with the sales professionals who are responsible for managing that sales representative, that distributor. And what it also does is that when it comes to the next time that we're running due diligence, we are armed with much more information that makes that risk assessment so much more richer. And when it comes to audit, it helps our internal audit team conduct those audits in a more efficient and effective and, dare I say, cheaper way. There are other benefits of analytics, using analytics to support your program. It can help you prioritize. That's particularly important when it comes to cultural health. The cultural health metrics may point you to particular locations where the team may need to spend more time focusing in on training on a particular issue, such as awareness of the conflicts of interest requirement, or that there's particular concern around harassment or discrimination, for example. Information allows you to direct your precious resources to where it's needed the most at any given time. It also enables you to become more efficient. We're continually being asked to do more and more. Many of you are already being asked to add on ESG/sustainability related obligations, but you're still having to do the day job in ethics and compliance. How can we ensure that we're doing more with the same amount of resource? Analytics can help, and we've got some examples of that coming up. The other great thing about the latest developments in analytics is it's still relatively new. And what that means is that because we have to do this analytics in some form, the learnings that we get for supporting our ethics and compliance program can then also be used to help other functions. And by helping other functions, it also helps to manage ethics and compliance risk. So one good example, fairly recently, we worked closely with our Treasury team, and our Treasury team were reflecting on the fact that they have a number of employees who are authorized signatories on bank accounts. And they wanted to make sure that whenever an employee was leaving the organization, that they could update those signatories so that they bring in someone new. The challenge is that that's two different depositories of information. You've got the list of signatories and you've got the list of current active employees coming from different sources. By bringing those two data sets together, you're able to raise a flag whenever an employee is marked that they are going to be leaving the organization. That then helps inform the Treasury team to put in place their plans for replacing that signatory with a new employee. Just a really simple example of bringing two different data sets in and making something that is valuable, in this case, for another function, but also helping the ethics and compliance team manage fraud or fraud risk. The other key piece around analytics is it can really enhance management's perceptions of the ethics and compliance team. When you're thinking about what analytics to run and how you visualize it, the information that is needed by the ethics compliance team can also be repurposed for management consumption, such that it becomes a management tool. It becomes actually useful. And rather than a succession of PowerPoint presentations, they're presented with a real-time dashboard that gives them information right at their fingertips that they need to help manage their team. And we've got an example of that coming up. So, getting started. What analytics would you want to conduct? These are two key questions that I was asking myself a couple of years ago. What's my priority, and is the particular analytics that I want to conduct actually feasible? In our situation, there were two priorities. One was distributors, so managing engagement with distributors and agents, particularly payments to agents or any other kind of form of payments to third-party sales reps. And then the other was monitoring travel and expenses. So we identified those as being our priorities. On the feasibility side, I was very fortunate in the fact that just as I was arriving at Albemarle, the company was moving to one single iteration of SAP. And so a lot of the challenges I know that many compliance officers have of doing data mapping between different ERP systems, we have not had. We went through a master data cleanup exercise as part of that project. And that's been enormously helpful for us in terms of having just one source of information when it comes to financial data. And so on the feasibility side, we were able to, with confidence, say yes, for our priorities, we were able to generate these dashboards. So that's what we did. We went ahead and created the dashboards. But there are opportunities to build on what you already do. So before we get into kind of some of the more kind of in-depth analytics, I wanted to kind of use this example of an evolution around training data. Training data is a staple kind of metric that we have done for years and years. But mindful of that kind of efficiency driver and also effectiveness driver, how can we get better at doing that? And so if you think about kind of the maturity of training data analytics, it started out with a very manual process set out in phase 1. And then maybe using a learning management system in phase 2, using the LMS reporting tool, that certainly helped with our board reporting. But then you have a dependency on the HR team to extract those reports on a periodic basis. But what if you're able to kind of take that data out of the LMS and then put it into a dashboard run by something like a Tableau or a Microsoft Power BI or another type of dashboard? Now you've got all of that information tucked behind the dashboard, which provided that you're kind of feeding that data on a regular basis through some sort of automated connection, it means that the compliance team, the HR team, and senior management now have access to that training completion data in real time. And that's something, as we'll see, that we have done in the past year. We've developed a dashboard that for all of our different training events, whether it be our code of conduct, corruption, sales, procurement, IT training, cybersecurity training, we're able to track that completion status in real time and use it as a tool with our HR team to help follow up with those people who haven't yet completed the training. But then, and we'll come on to this a little bit later, by bringing that data out of the HR system and into a dashboard, it gives you the opportunity to bring in data from other sources of information. And we'll talk about those other cultural health proxies later on. So this is a screenshot of our dashboard, which shows this is our kind of our ICT training on our new ICT policy. And it shows kind of like how you're able to filter it out by the training title, the business unit, the core status, and we're able to kind of drill down and organize the data in many ways and make it available to those who need to kind of track completion. This has saved a lot of time in terms of the engagement that we have with the HR team and also with the time taken to kind of prepare our board reports. But what about a new scenario? When you're thinking about your risk profile and your priority, how do you actually go about coming up with a individual dashboard? So you have to think about, the purpose of the analytics. What's the anticipated outcome? Who are the key stakeholders? Who is going to be the audience? Because it may be that there are different dashboards for different people. What's the required underlying data? How accurate is it? Where is this data? Is it internal or external? Much data, particularly in the ethics compliance world, is hosted by your due diligence service provider or your helpline provider. That data you can grab and you can bring it out internally and you can run your own analytics on that data. Are there risks associated with the management of that data? From a personal data point of view, or data privacy point of view, or any other kind of perspective? Do we develop this in-house, or do we outsource the preparation of such a dashboard? We'll talk about that in a moment. And then perhaps one of the most important considerations is, what are the resources needed to respond to the data analytics? It's all very well to have a dashboard that throws up potential flags in your third-party risk monitoring, but you then need to make sure that there is a team, people there to help follow up with those flags. So that decision about in-source or outsource, I think there are a number of options. And one option is to outsource, to use a vendor, particularly in the fraud analytics, who can undertake that analytics in their own proprietary platform. So you export your data, drop it in, and then they will run it, and they may then interpret the results. And there are a number of examples given here, all slightly different. And so certainly Lextegrity, past spoke about their model where that's what they do. They kind of extract the data, drop it in, and then they'll kind of run the reports to show the flags. There are many other companies out there that provide a similar type of service. And typically that is independent of the transaction window. That's what I call that passive risk event monitoring. But there are also kind of analytic solutions where it's actually embedded into the workflow process itself. So whether it's a payments system such as SAP, or in the case of Apsen, where Apsen are plugged into an expense management tool such as Concur, and as the employee is submitting their expense claim, Apsen is within that Concur workflow, is monitoring that expense in real time, and then throwing up the flags for a compliance team to review. And so there are choices there about whether you kind of export the data and have someone kind of prepare the results. Do you have it as part of a transaction workflow with a system that you already have? And then there's also the Brewright Consortium that Matt talked about in the first week. They're particularly for high volume transactions involving vendors or other types of third parties. There may be some great merit and maybe even some cost savings in actually using the Brewright Consortium, taking advantage of their algorithms to help identify particularly risky third parties or risky transactions. Option two is to have perhaps one of these vendors or another vendor come in and help you develop your own analytics platform using your own company's analytics tools. And then I think what I want to focus on is option three, which is building your own analytics platform with support from IT and other functions. I will say that we're a bit of a hybrid between all three of them. And so we do use outside services in part. We did get some help with building up our platform initially, and now we are kind of going it alone a little bit in the development of new dashboards with my team and the support of our IT function. So if you are thinking about building that platform by yourselves, then I've set out the key roles to be thinking about. And it took me quite a while, 2 years ago, to be understanding the significance of each of these different roles. So you have the dreamer, and that's kind of the compliance officer who's figuring out, based on the risk profile, what it is that they want to know. Then there's the data scientist, who's kind of like the conductor of the orchestra, who's trying to kind of piece all of the parts together. And we'll see a representative example of that in a moment. The analyst is there to go out and grab the information, and based on that architecture that the data scientist has put in, convert it into some sort of visualization. The engineer is there to help make sure that the data is stored in the appropriate location in the appropriate way, whether in a kind of physical server or in the cloud, and all the associated governance around that. So this is kind of setting out those roles with that the key steps of developing a dashboard in-house. So you've got your data source, your data type, your storage, the analytics, so whether it be filters, the rules, or some sort of more complicated algorithm, and then the outcome. And you'll see that each of those roles, individuals or types of individuals, play a particular role in kind of working together to put together the platform. I will say that analyst role is incredibly important. And if you can find someone who has experience with the likes of Power BI or Tableau, and as long as you can set that person off to go and find information and to bring it into a dashboard, that is incredibly powerful. And actually is kind of probably a starting point on your road to your analytics journey. Okay, so in the time available, that's the context. What I want to do now is really get into the case studies. And we're going to go through these at a quick pace, because I think that once we go through a few, you'll start to see a kind of a cadence of how we've approached each of these scenarios. And so case study one was as a monitoring tool for our traveling expenses of our employees. And so our data sources are really from Concur and from SAP. And the audience for this particular dashboard is a compliance team, our T&E operations team, and our internal audit function. Clearly, this data does contain personal data. So we did conduct a data protection impact assessment in line with GDPR in conjunction with our Chief Data Privacy Officer. This is the architecture. So this is what the data scientist and your data analyst will help put together. It may say complicated, but really it's about just understanding where's the data coming from, what's the type of data, how is it going to be organized, how is it going to be visualized. And you don't need to worry so much as a compliance officer about the nuts and the bolts of this. This is where your analyst and your engineer can help you in kind of putting this together. And this is a representation of our T&E dashboard. We've obviously scrubbed the more sensitive information, but what this is showing you is how we've risk ranked certain T&E transactions based on a predefined risk criteria, based on location or based on expense type or other types of metric. This is clearly intended for my team. But that same data can also be used to help inform senior management as part of their management responsibilities. And so what we did, we prepared for our executive leadership team using the same data, a different dashboard that combines the information at a more aggregated level, really focused on aggregate spend so that they can understand how much we're spending on T&E, where we're spending it, and what types of product and service we're spending it on. But we also incorporated other risk metrics. And so aside from ethics and compliance risk, we also wanted to include health and safety risk into this. And so we incorporated, based on real-time health and safety information organized by our security team, we incorporated that into this management dashboard to show how people are traveling to high-risk locations. What's the prevalence of that? Okay, another example, this time on payments to agents and distributors. Same principle. This is actually an example of the type of slide that we put together that sets out at a high level the purpose of the dashboard, the key data sources, who it's intended for, and the risk assessment associated with putting this dashboard together. Really simple, high-level overview so that we can communicate this to key stakeholders within the organization. Again, same principle. This is the architecture, and you'll notice here that for the payments one, most of the information here was coming just from one source, from SAP. So from that point of view, it was pretty straightforward. What we've got here is the actual dashboard showing, again, with the information scrub, the information, the payment information made to third parties. That information is then reviewed by my team, and if there is any flags in these payment activity, then they will go ahead and review that with the relevant member of the sales organization. Now, what I would say is that because we have reduced our number of sales representatives over the years, it means that our number is manageable, which means that we don't need to be applying additional filters, algorithms, machine learning to kind of call out problematic payments. There's a number of third parties. It's a manageable now, which means that we don't actually need to kind of go to that next level of analytic sophistication when we don't need to. And I think that's something to always bear in mind, is only kind of apply that more complicated analytics if you've got such a sheer volume of transactions or analytics activity that you need to sort out what are the true flags. I wanted to include this example as a great illustration of how you can bring data in from different sources. And so what we have here is a dashboard that brings information from our due diligence provider, Exeger, from SAP, from our contract management system, and from our Salesforce. And for any one distributor, this dashboard will then say, when was the date of the last due diligence completed, the date of our steering committee approval, the last ethics and compliance certification, the date of the last training for that third party, and the date of the last audit. All of that information is being pulled from different systems and being maintained in real time in this tracker. This tracker is very helpful for the compliance team because they can see when a third party is coming up for a due diligence refresh. But it's also very helpful as a tool for our sales organization because it's primarily their responsibility to manage these distributors and to ensure that they are having all of those requirements met, whether it be the certification, the training, and everything. So case study C, this is another example of how bringing data from two different sources can be really powerful. So in our third-party risk management platform in Exeger, we have the status of our due diligence and our compliance certifications. In Actus, which is our contract management system, we have our contract status. Those statuses are then feed into Salesforce, and Salesforce is used to primarily kind of do the order management with our customers. If our due diligence is out of date, or our certification has expired, or the contract is out of date, the systems will tell Salesforce this third party should no longer be active, and it will deactivate that distributor in Salesforce, making it very hard for the customer it makes it impossible for the sales organization to then issue their orders in relation to a particular customer. And that hard stop then means things work very fast to make sure that whatever that gap is, whether it's the due diligence or the contract management, gets rectified. One other example in relation to distributors. Again, two different sources of information. In Exeger, we have a list of, for any particular distributor, the countries in which a distributor is active. over on the right-hand side, we have the information in our SAP system of where a distributor is sold to or shipped to. We bring that information together, and if there is an attempt to sell product to a distributor outside of their authorized territory, it will raise a flag, and then my team will follow up with the appropriate salesperson. Again, just a really great way of bringing data together in a control that helps manage the risk of scope creep. Finally, with distributors, this is an example of a risk profile chart. And so with the information being scrubbed out, but what you can see is that for any particular business unit or for Albemarle as a whole, we have the total number of third parties, the average risk rating of the selected third parties, the success rate in terms of pre-approvals, and then you can see that we've taken snapshots over time of that number and also the risk profile, which can inform senior management of what our risk profile is for a particular business unit and in a particular country. So for example, in China right now, we're doing a lot of building of new plants. And so that means that we've got a lot of vendors who engage with government officials who go through our pre-approvals process. What we're seeing in the trending is that our numbers are going up, and also the risk profile is going up slightly as we kind of engage with more vendors who are going through permitting processes in China. And then one final kind of example, one which is, for me personally really, really interesting, is how, if we focused previously on kind of financial transaction data, can we do something similar with cultural health metrics? How can we bring kind of different cultural health proxies together in a way that's meaningful and instructive and can help direct our limited resources? And so many of these metrics that set out here, we already have, whether it be with metrics associated with employee conduct, such as code of conduct concerns, amount of discipline administered, evidence of retaliation. HR will also have employee retention information, not necessarily our data, but data that is of a similar type to the code of conduct investigations data. We may also have information around policy non-compliance, the failure to obtain pre-approvals or to escalate, to notify the legal department in a particular situation. But there are also other examples, such as health and safety incidents. We've helped our health and safety function put together a real-time dashboard for health and safety incidents. And there are other examples of kind of policy non-compliance that may serve as some sort of proxy for how a particular team, business unit, or location are faring. How employees are engaging at a location with the code of conduct or particular policies. Combining that objective data then with more subjective employee pulse survey data, suddenly each of those data will tell one particular story. But is there a way of bringing that information together using the analytics tools that we now have, such that you can actually organize that data in a way that you could almost come up with some sort of league table of sites or business units. So you're assigning kind of weighted scores for each of these metrics, and then when they're assigned to particular business units or locations, you come up and you start to see that maybe there's a site where there is a high number of investigations, there's a high degree of employee retention, there is a high failure rate of the need to obtain pre-approvals, and that site is particularly slow in completing their annual code of conduct training. If you combine all that information together, that may become apparent. And that's the power of analytics, of bringing that data together and giving you insights that you wouldn't ordinarily have. So I'm not going to spend too much time on artificial intelligence, to say that there is a case for it, particularly where there is, with machine learning, where you've got a large volume of data points and you're needing to kind of try and figure out what that means from a risk profile. Machine learning can certainly help with that. And that's certainly the basis of BrewRight, in terms of additional reading, I'd highly recommend the Coalition for Integrity publication on machine learning. It is focused on anti-corruption, but I think it has broader application to other areas of compliance. And so just finally, before I hand over to Scott to questions, some key takeaways. So analytics are there to support your priorities. They're not priorities in themselves. You are the master of what you want to achieve. And one of the learnings I've had is that once you get going, it's a bit like Pringles. You can't stop. And it becomes easier and easier to develop your next dashboard. My analysts can help prepare a brand new dashboard now within the space of 2 to 3 weeks, whereas those first dashboards took 2 to 3 months really to kind of get together. Certainly, the vendors like Lextegrity and others are there, and they fulfill a need. And as I mentioned, we do rely on vendors for certain requirements. But I think also reflecting on whether you can do it in-house, it does require that upfront investment, but it does really give you an opportunity to explore other opportunities for enhancing your ethics and compliance program. But always remember, if you're developing these analytics dashboards, make sure that you're planning the appropriate amount of resources for the follow-up. And then finally, this analytics is really to serve one key purpose, which is engagement, whether it be with your sales organization, with senior management. It's there to power conversation. That's the best form of analytics. And whether it's part of a risk assessment, that face time is so incredibly important. And with that, I'll hand back to Scott.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. So we do have a number of questions coming in, and I'll try to pick some for Andrew. And if you have not asked a question, please feel free to do so in the chat, and I'll do my best to integrate them in the time we have. I will try to answer one of the most popular questions that we have coming in, which is, are the slides available? And I'm told that on the audience view, you should see a resources tab, and it is the third file in the resources tab. It should be a copy of Andrew's presentation. And just to be on the safe side, I'll put our contact information up there. If you're not seeing it, email one of us and we can get it to you. So Andrew, so got some questions coming in. I'll ask you one of my own, which is, what do you know now that you wish you knew then? And by then, I mean when you first started down this journey to put together an analytics platform. And what lessons have you learned that you could convey to someone who may be at the starting line, to things to keep in mind, either to not overestimate or underestimate in terms of the amount of work involved?
For me, it was about understanding the different roles that help you support the ethics compliance program. So understanding the differences between the architect, the engineer, the data scientist, and the analyst was so incredibly important. Once I got that in my head and I understand who was responsible for what, then it was much more easier.
That's great. And the next question is related to that, which is, what is the professional background, education, experience of your data analyst?
Trey, he comes from an IT kind of background. He has supported our procurement function in the past. He's also been, before that, he was an outside analytics and software development company. I mean, what I would say is that the reason why it works so well with Trey is that the ability to go out and find the information, collect that information in a way that's consistent with our governance, and then convert that into a dashboard that meets my requirements. That's the art of the analyst. And so having that background of familiarity with systems such as SAP, other sources like Salesforce, but also the visualization software of like Tableau or Power BI is really important.
Great. Next question is, how did analytics change the day-to-day work of your own role? Are there certain things that you find yourself doing more of, less of, or is it the same, which is informed more by analytics?
The great thing about the analytics is it powers those conversations that I mentioned right at the end. So I'm now having really enriched, robust conversations with senior management about what's going on in their organizations. They have access to that data now in real time. We give access to it. And then every so often, I'll take the opportunity to schedule time with them to kind of tease in on one particular kind of issue or trend that I'm seeing. And so for me, it's about the power of the conversations with key stakeholders internally.
Great. And we've got a couple questions related to some of the nuts and bolts. So one is your agent distributor payment monitoring a reactive process after the payment was made, or do you capture it on a more proactive basis at the time the purchase request at the purchase request stage, excuse me?
Yeah. So we do have additional controls in our order to cash process, which were beyond the scope of this presentation. And so if you like, the analytics kind of after the event are seen as a safety net.
Great. And related to that, someone writes, when you have a hard stop for a vendor because due diligence is out of date or a contract is expired, that can cause a lot of business disruption, particularly when the system incorrectly deactivates a critical vendor. This can create a lot of pressure to override the automatic deactivation. Any advice on how to manage this risk?
So we make sure that the controls work. So on a periodic basis, we'll audit to make sure that those links between the systems are working to avoid the incorrect kind of deactivation. When it comes to kind of an unfortunate deactivation because something has expired, we see it as an important part of helping, whether it be sales or procurement or a sponsor of a vendor, own that relationship and the associated compliance responsibility. That's on them to make sure that all of those boxes are kind of in green, if you like. And if they lapse, then it's not a case of, well, that's compliance's problem. Go fix it. It's that's on me. What can I do to help? Make sure that we can get this back on track.
Great. And this will be the last question. And by the way, I'm still getting some chatter that people still can't see a copy of the presentation. So I'll put our contact information up here again. Shoot either one of us, we will both have the content for it. But anyway, Andrew, the last question is this. It's the garbage in, garbage out question, which is how do you ensure data quality when data is coming from different systems?
As part of your governance process, so with as I mentioned, with the transition to one iteration of SAP, there was a master data cleanup exercise. But to the point that when you've got multiple different data sources, you're then making sure that with the relevant functions, such as HR with employee data, or with our third-party service providers, whether it be helpline or due diligence, that we're making sure that the correct information is being brought in. But you have to have that as part of your governance process.
Great. Well, we are just about out of time. I will say when Andrew, I'll tell a story. When he sent his PowerPoint deck prior to this event, he emailed it at 1 a.m. And I hope it was because you just couldn't sleep one night, but I have a feeling you're working so hard within the morning to prepare this. So thank you so much, Andrew, for all you did to put this presentation together. I trust the audience found it super helpful. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Everin to close this out.
Thank you, Andrew and Scott, for that thought-provoking presentation and conversation. We're going to close today's webinar at this time, but I have a few messages to share with you. To access the resources, I know that some people are having trouble with that. Try refreshing your screen before you log out and see if that helps. The webinar will be available on demand on the events page of ECI's website, ethics.org, by the end of the week, so you can access the recording that way. And please be sure to fill out today's survey so that we can continue to provide you with content and events to suit your needs and interests. And if you haven't done so already, please download your continuing education certificate as well. Thank you again to Compliance Systems Legal Group for sponsoring this series. Have a great rest of the day.